Busy Saturday of notable commitment announcements and several more notable commitment announcements ahead for Louisiana versus all y'all. This is Recruit That Boot. I'm Jared Roser. He's Sam Spiegelman, and we're going to look at a hectic Saturday around Louisiana in particular with a couple of Destrehan commitments as well as the latest Houston commitment in Louisiana, kind of highlighting that day, and then some notable days moving forward, particularly for LSU fans to know with some notable prospects on the Tigers' radar. Sam, what's going on, man? It's not like a hectic time, but there's enough going on where you got to stay on your toes a little bit with some of these commitment announcements. Still a couple of weeks away from fall camp, and on the heels of a busy weekend. You in particular with not just Louisiana responsibilities. Some are flying your way with a little bit more frequency.
Yeah, it's I've probably said this too many times already, but there's no downtime in the summer anymore. It's everyone is getting ready. It's obviously the June visits, the June camps, yields July decisions, August decisions. So we're right in the heat of all of that. Obviously, I have huge news to share. I'm officially an LSWA member now, which is why I wore this denim shirt to obviously we're both wearing yellow in celebration of the big news. But this explains my dressy garb for today's episode.
I was going to ask just now when you said you're an LSWA member. I mean, congrats, I guess. That's why you wore your denim coat.
I had to look the part.
Is that something that we're supposed to? Is we all wear denim jackets now?
in the summer months for prestigious podcast appearances, you want to represent the brand accordingly, Jared. So I was like, I could just wear this T-shirt like I would be wearing, but I was like, no, I'm an LSWA member, so I'm gonna put on another fancier outer shirt and just do it up to the best of my abilities for this 30-minute podcast.
Well, I appreciate you classing the podcast up with your denim jacket. So thanks so much for the time and effort that went into that. Let's jump in, man. The Saturday, I saw 5 commitments around Louisiana. Tyquarius Wilson from Union Parish commits to Mississippi Valley State to kind of start the day. We kind of wrapped it up with Sam Nations, the big center from Ruston, who committed to Northwestern State, not too far from home. But the 3 real headline power conference, we talked about the Destrehan duo a little bit, kind of previewing it last week. And then we didn't really talk so much about Kyle Johnson, the standout from Bunkie, who committed to Houston. But we're going to talk about those 3, starting with Jhase Thomas, the big LSU addition, who was the first of those big 3. The Tigers come in late and in the span of a month make up any possible ground they didn't have by being involved in the recruiting process for Jhase a little bit earlier. And Jhase said he was pretty quick when Brian Kelly offered him that he knew he wanted to be a Tiger. So what were your thoughts on the addition of Jhase Thomas to this LSU 2025 class at a position group of need and the job that the Tigers did to build those relationships here in the last month plus?
Yeah, Jhase Thomas, the first DB commitment now in LSU's class. Listen, it could have been a really explosive day for Houston if not for that LSU offer coming in. You talked about the relationships with Blake Baker and Jake Olson, LSU safeties coach, as well as Frank Wilson, the area recruiter. All 3 coaches very heavily involved, as well as Brian Kelly here. Listen, they watched him in the spring game. They were evaluating him in the spring. After he tested well, that offer was on the table. You and I saw it in person. Brian Kelly, the graduate champion speech, I think that really resonated with Jhase as well as his parents. I think that LSU had been lightly recruiting him for much of the year since that those new coaches got to campus. He's been on campus quite a bit for junior days. And that they beat out Houston for a really talented safety. We talked about it. He's only in his 2nd or 3rd year playing safety after transitioning from the offensive side of the ball. He's big, he's rangy, he is not afraid to lower his shoulder, and we continue to get better and better coverage. I like him roaming over the top, and we saw it camp really well at kind of playing a little bit more press from the nickel, and we'll see how he continues to grow in this position. It's still new to him.
You mentioned an aspect too, as much as we talk about the offer came a month to the day before his birthday celebration commitment announcement. The groundwork had certainly already been laid there for months, if not looking to some degree to years leading up to this. And I think the way that Jhase and his family handled some of the recruiting process, they dealt with it really well in terms of a level of patience and control what you can control, and not get, as you see with some prospects, when the LSU offer doesn't come as early as some of the other offers, some guys will get a little bit impatient, get a little bit salty, and there wasn't any of that. Essentially, when the offer did come, Jhase and the Thomas family kind of took a step back and looked at, okay, where are all the options? Where do we want to be? And there was no sense of, why did it take LSU so long to offer? He just knew where he wanted to be. And so it seemed like it became a little bit of a no-brainer for him to be a part of the home state program and to be a part of DBU and following some of the things there. He talked about both of those aspects, that this is home and I want to be home, as well as I want to go to the league, and this is a place that produces guys who go to the league. And so I thought a really, fun day celebrating his decision to do so, and a really nice win for the Tigers. I think as much as we've seen him make plays in his short time playing safety, that there is so much ceiling ahead, that we've yet to see the best of Jhase Thomas as a safety, and that he's going to be a fun one to watch in Tiger Stadium.
Yeah, sometimes, as Jhase has shown us, sometimes you have to trust the process. And what I love, to compound what you've been saying, he took both of those official visits after getting the LSU offer. He went to Houston to see if they would move the needle any further than that LSU offer that he'd been waiting for. And he made it to Lubbock right before making the decision on Saturday for his 17th birthday.
His teammate, Phillip Wright III, announced his Michigan commitment. I mean, just as we talked about last week, we anticipated to be LSU and Michigan for these guys. But officially, Saturday evening, Phillip Wright, the latest Michigan commitment, choosing the Wolverines over LSU and Georgia. He kind of threw that Georgia hat during his commitment announcement before narrowing it down to the two. He also becomes the third Louisiana Michigan commitment in less than a month, and spoke to the job that Ron Bellamy and company, Sharon Moore, just in making those guys feel comfortable about a long distance move and going to a place that there hasn't been as much familiarity necessarily on the roster. What does Phillip Wright bring to that Michigan commitment class, and how increasingly worried do you think LSU should be to see top guys? Because I think all three of these guys, Philly, Jasper Parker, and Jacob Washington, are top 20 to 25 guys in this class that are now all headed to a place that you haven't looked at as a notable competitor for LSU traditionally.
Yeah, definitely. I had them all as top 20 guys going into their senior seasons, at least, some maybe right on that bubble. But, Phillip Wright, what he brings is Olympic speed. He's got track speed for days, and, he's got size at 6'1" and just north of 180 pounds. The biggest thing with Philly Wright is yielding all that talent and seeing all the production on the field. That's been one thing that's been lacking, is the consistency in the production, but we've seen it in flashes. We've seen it in glimpses that he can beat anyone downfield. He's a crafty route runner. And when you're talking about big splash plays and big plays to take away the top half of the field, that's what Philly Wright brings to the table. And again, I've talked about Jacob Washington on this podcast quite a bit. I think he's going to challenge to be the number one receiver in the state by the end of the year. Him and Teron Francis, I think, really neck and neck, in my opinion. They're obviously different types of receivers, but Jacob, again, has speed to get downfield. I think he's a more technical route runner. I think he can attack multiple levels of the field and can work inside and outside as well. And Jasper Parker, we talked about someone that shined at the Rivals 5-star last month, and someone who has size, speed, can run between the tackles, can also make plays as a pass catcher, can block. Built like a tank, which is what you want in a running back for the Big Ten. Ron Bellamy and Sharon Moore, with Sharon Moore being the head coach now, taking over for Harbaugh, you're seeing the emphasis on recruiting different parts of the country. Like I think we pointed out on this show, only 4 kids have signed with Michigan out of Louisiana since 2003. They're one away from matching that total, which is just insane to think about. I think Sharon Moore has empowered Ron Bellamy to kind of trust his own evals, what he saw in the spring. And I think so far that's the other 3 really talented guys that if I'm LSU, I wouldn't want to let all of them leave the state if I didn't have to.
Kind of leads into the next question. It's July and all these guys are committed to Michigan, and so that's really exciting for Wolverines fans. for LSU fans, how closely should they continue to watch those three? Do you see a potential that any of them could ultimately end up in purple and gold by the end of this, as their senior season plays out, and as they potentially, end up possibly in Tiger Stadium for a Saturday at some point to, to take in a game? Do you see the Tigers coaching staff ramping some things up with those guys? And do you see any door open that any of them end up in Baton Rouge or elsewhere, instead of up in Ann Arbor?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest catalyst in that will obviously be their senior seasons, all three of them respectively. We've seen it before when a senior prospect has a season that catches the state by attention, that creates the buzz across the state. It gets coaches talking as well. So, like I said, if Jacob Washington is challenging to be the number one receiver in the state, if Philly Wright is kind of doing the same thing for Destrahan as a senior leader of that wide receiver group that's deep and talented. Phillip Wright has already mentioned that he's leaving the door open for a fall official visit for LSU if that presents itself. LSU has flirted with Jacob Washington in the past. They're obviously very well aware of him at Archbishop Shaw. And I think LSU is okay at running back. But if Jasper is having the season that we believe that he might be having come September, October, Frank Wilson might be down in the West Bank checking out a game and seeing if he's missing out on someone and making sure of it. So the biggest catalyst will be how they fare in their senior season. But LSU, other schools around the country, I'm sure are going to be taking notice of those guys that were very highly sought after.
We've talked a lot about how long it had been since Michigan had previous Louisiana signees. We've talked some about the job that Willie Fritz and company have done at Houston, but to kind of add some of that similar context, now with 4 2025 commits on top of the late additions to that 24 class with Kobe Young and Traville Frederick, that's 6 guys in the span of about 7 months or so that Willie Fritz and company have pulled from Louisiana after back-to-back signing classes where there hadn't been Louisiana signees headed to Houston. And really, I mean, the better part of a decade since there had been 5 or 6 total Louisiana guys heading to Houston. And so Kyle Johnson joining that group that we've talked about previously with DK Mays, Jacob Bradford, Rashad Sterling, I thought was pretty notable. And particularly because Kyle and I talking on Saturday morning, he still sounded like he was probably Mississippi State bound. He was torn, but was leaning toward Mississippi State. And then by 4:45 in the afternoon, he's announcing that he's the 4th Louisiana guy joining that Houston commitment class. What were your thoughts watching the job that those guys did to swing a guy that had grown up wanting to be an SEC football player to now, be a member of the Houston Cougars 2025 class?
Yeah, well, first, I think it says a lot to point out that Houston had not been recruiting Louisiana for that many cycles. I think that's it's an indictment on the previous staffs because, as you know, I mean, from covering LSU all those years, they viewed Houston as another section of Louisiana. There's so much former New Orleans, former Louisiana residents in Houston, and I know from making that drive 100 times in East Texas all the way to Houston, obviously outside of Houston all the way up to here to Austin. It's littered with Louisiana guys. On my block alone, there's families from Lafayette and Lake Charles that we've already made friends with. Or friends is a subjective term, of course, but we're friendly because of those aspects. But
I really hope that no one in your neighborhood is thinking, you know what, Sam and I are, that's our new very good friend, and then they tune in to recruit that boot, and they're like, well, I mean, I guess maybe we're not as close as I was hoping.
No one has ever had that thought about me. Trust me. No, I think we've talked about it at length, but I think Willie Fritz established, and his staff for that matter as well, just established really deep, strong ties during their run at Tulane. We know about the success they had on the field, but the progress and the eventual marks that they reached, the heights of recruiting the state, it spoke volumes because at a lot of point there wasn't as easy for them to recruit the secondary and third and compete for the best guys in the state, and they turned that around and it showed on the field instantaneously because they're excellent coaches and they really can see talent. And they've recruited at a really high pace. So it was great to see that transition over to Houston. I love the guys that they already have committed, and Kyle kind of he fits that same mold for me as one of the guys that I'm super excited to see what he does as a senior. You put me on to Kyle, I think middle of last season. I'm I'm right on the verge of anointing him the mayor of Bunkie. When I see kids that make plays on offense, defense, and special teams, he does it at such a high clip. He's a great receiver. He's great with the ball in his hands. He's dynamic as a returner. And I think the upside that he brings at defensive back, given the experience on the other layers of the field, the other fractions of the game, and what he's done in coverage, the innate playmaking ability that he possesses, I think, between him and Jacob Bradford, I love the two DBs that Houston has. I think that they are certainly P4 players. I would have guessed that they would have been somewhere in the SEC. So in my opinion, keep on keeping on if I'm Willie Fritz and company.
Yeah, you mentioned the mayor of Bunkie. Kyle, certainly one of the faces of that sort of resurgence of Bunkie being a pretty competitive football program there. He and his quarterback, Dylan Compton, two guys that I think fans around Louisiana should certainly know. And Kyle fitting in with that group of now 4 committed Louisiana guys to the Houston 2025 class. 4 guys that I think are all realistically, top 30-ish prospects in the state. I think you could argue higher, maybe top 25, but certainly close to that 30 mark. And Houston hasn't signed 4 Louisiana guys since dating back to 2013. And I think when you look at not just the quantity of 4 and potentially counting, depending on what happens this fall, but the quality of these guys is really, really notable for Willie and company to be dipping into the boot and pulling those guys west. Looking ahead at some of these upcoming commitments, I mentioned a lot really pertaining particularly to LSU and guys that LSU fans are watching both in-state and out of state. Just sort of a little schedule rundown for folks. A couple that have caught my attention. DJ Pickett scheduled to announce on Wednesday, the 17th. Saturday, we had talked about previously, Jaboree Antoine had set that date of the 20th for his next announcement. We also have a commitment announcement with LSU as a finalist for Derek Meadows, the big wide receiver from Bishop Gorman, now set for Saturday afternoon. Lionel Prudhomme, the big offensive lineman from Captain Shreve, is scheduled to announce on the 26th. And then you just had the report, August 8th is now the date for CJ Jim Coyley, the big standout safety from up there in Nashville. And so just kind of hitting on a couple of these, particularly DJ and the guys this week. DJ Pickett, the 17th. LSU has a world of competition from coast to coast to try and bring him to Baton Rouge. Can the Tigers pull this one off and further bolster that secondary that they just added to with Jhase Thomas?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, Corey Raymond would love to. DJ Pickett has been Corey Raymond's guy since he was at Florida, recruiting the Zephyr Hills 5-star corner, 5-star safety, 5-star athlete. He's one of one in this class. I think LSU is playing from behind. I think that they were the popular trending team for much of the spring. And I think as these official visits started to come to fruition, Oregon and Miami took a big leap forward going into tomorrow's announcement. I like where Oregon is sitting. I think that confidence is waning a little bit in Coral Gables. I like the way that Antonio Parks, that the Oregon staff from Dan Lanning to Chris Hampton, it's a lot of great coaches have been recruiting Antonio Parks, and the way that they've been recruiting number one receiver Jacorian Moore. They might be poised to add the number 1 corner in their class in DJ Pickett, and right now my money's on the Ducks. He'll also this weekend you have Jaboree Antoine, who has Miami, Florida State, and LSU. Again, one-time LSU commitment. I think he's going to end up playing in the Sunshine State. At least, he says that it's going to be his final decision. I like where Miami is sitting with him, but I don't think Florida State is going anywhere. But he's been to Miami quite a bit, and I think that they've left a pretty big impression. I could see them almost dial down on Jaboree, especially if they do end up missing on DJ Pickett. Who am I skipping here? Oh, Derek Meadows.
Right.
One of the best receivers in the country out of Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. This has been getting interesting. He was supposed to announce last weekend. It was obviously a very busy Saturday for you and I, and Derek Meadows ends up extending this. As some of the other finalists have added blue chippers at his position at wide receiver, it's seemingly coming down to Notre Dame and LSU think LSU has kind of tried to double down on Derek Meadows as some of their top targets at the position are falling off the board or leaning in different directions. Notre Dame is still the team that I'm still, feeling that they have an edge right now, but I think that there's still a couple of days to go. Cortez Hankton, Joe Sloan, and those guys trying to double down and get Derek Meadows on board. If there's a team to be worried about, if you're Notre Dame, it's got to be the Tigers. And then later this month, you talked about Lionel Perdome. He's between Arkansas and Mississippi State, a couple other local schools, Houston, Tulane, La Tech, all in the mix for the 3-star. I think he's playing offensive tackle for Captain Shreve. I think he's going to be an excellent interior guy at the next level. Right now, I think the Hogs are the team trending with Lionel. They've got him on campus quite a few times, including last month for an official visit. And then CJ Jim Coyley, set to announce August 8th, LSU, Stanford, Alabama, Tennessee. This is a 2-team race between the Tigers and Stanford. After visiting LSU, he canceled his Alabama official visit. Frank Wilson, I don't know if you've heard of him, Coach CJ's father at Landry Walker. So I think that the relationships are there. This is a kid with a 4.3 GPA. So when we talked about Jhase Thomas here in the graduate champion speech, when BK gave that to CJ and his family, I think that for a kid deciding between the Stanford degree and the LSU degree, I think the LSU degree with the chance to compete for championships put LSU in a good spot heading into next month's announcement.
Wow. Bravo, cranking through all of that. I didn't expect you to go through all of them at once, but a couple of notes, reactions. Antonio Parks, AP, gets he's now at like 4 references in the past 2 episodes. So he's got to be pretty pleased with us about now. Derek Meadows and the way that LSU receiver recruiting board has shaken up. How do you look at kind of where they are and the significance of, if they can pull him off, what that means for this recruiting class and where they are right now, versus if he becomes another nationally notable prospect who starts to head elsewhere after we watch 2 of the Louisiana guys that we talked about notably commit to Michigan, and some of these other guys that we've talked so much about look like they're leaning elsewhere, the Khalil Lockett's and Jamie French's and company of the world. CJ announcing Florida State not that long ago. Where does that LSU receiver board go at that point if Derek Meadows does end up a Notre Dame commit on Saturday?
Yeah, like you mentioned, Decorian Moore is to Oregon. He's completely off the board at this point. He has been since he decommitted from LSU. Khalil Lockett right now is trending toward Texas, and Alabama is probably running second there with a couple of more days until he announces, I believe, at the beginning of August. That's another guy that LSU has had right at the top of their board, even when Decorian Moore was committed. And then you talk about Jamie French, who's going to have a decision at the end of next month before his senior season. Seems like there is a buzz that he is going to end up in Baton Rouge for the Bayou Bash. That'll be a critical visit, because even as a decision nears, there's still buzz around Texas, around even Miami, which wasn't even listed as a finalist. And the way that those recruitments have gone, they have not worked out for LSU. So I think if they do get Jamie on campus, that'll be the other big receiver to watch. But Jamie French and Derek Meadows are 2 different types of receivers. I think if they're able to get Derek Meadows, it's a massive victory for Coach Hankton and company, getting a premium blue chipper on board at this point after a couple of swings and misses at some of the guys we've mentioned. But it does leave the door open for Jamie French. And like I said, if they do miss on their top out-of-state targets, it's going to be about senior evals. And so whether that's in Georgia or Florida or Texas or Mississippi, or they do turn their attentions to guys like Philly Wright and Jacob Washington and so on and so forth, these are their out-of-state board. We'll definitely have a better view of it after this weekend, and then again after Jamie French announces right before the season gets going.
And then a little bit more on CJ, who is probably one of the guys of this group that I'm least familiar with in terms of having watched him less than some of these other guys, particularly all the in-state guys we've talked about. But this 2025 commitment class for LSU, they get Jhase Thomas. How would CJ and Jhase potentially fit together long-term, and kind of the different things that they bring to a secondary?
I'm a big fan of CJ Jim Coyley. You already know I'm a big fan of Jhase Thomas. At 6'3" and just north of 210 pounds, I think is what Jim Coyley weighed in at during his LSU official visit last month. Obviously, it's the off season, so he'll weigh in a little bit differently when Lipscomb Academy kicks off in a couple of weeks. Which I am trying to sneak a trip to Nashville to maybe see him play this season. Who knows? But I think he's someone that, whether he starts at a strong safety, I think he's one of those big safeties that is so athletically gifted and instinctual and can cover sideline to sideline that winds up growing into an outside linebacker. I think that's what LSU's vision is for CJ. He's already, again, 6'3", north of 210 pounds. With Jhase Thomas on board and still in the mix for some more DBs, I think that they'd like to pad more speed at those positions and then try to get these athletic guys to fill out the depth chart at linebacker. And I think that whether it's as a cross training at both positions or he ends up just eventually moving to linebacker, I think that's where his future is.
There you go. A lot to watch certainly in the coming weeks, and we'll be checking back in weekly and just kind of updating how some of these things are going, as well as now we're getting pretty close to time to start talking about some season preview type stuff. So make sure to keep an eye as we talk about some of the notable prospects and notable matchups to watch heading into the fall. We'll be hitting on some of those type of topics here in the coming weeks as well. Bro, it's damn near football season. We're going to be ramping up camp stuff here in about 2 weeks. And then obviously, 5 or 6 weeks away from some of these college and high school programs in different states kicking off the season. Looking forward to it.
Wake me up when the season starts, Jarrett.
He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jarrett Roser. I thought for a second you were going to go into a Green Day wake me up when September ends type moment. But again, this is Recruit That Boot. Appreciate y'all as always for tuning in and watching. It's been fun to see some of the views numbers grow a little bit and then hear some feedback from some folks that are enjoying listening to some of these recruiting updates. Again, one last time, he's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. Thanks.
Shout out to the listeners.